Hello, listeners. Mallory Wilsey here, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network, and I want to take just a quick moment to tell you about another show on our podcast network designed specifically for all the education technology enthusiasts out there. The Higher Ed Geek podcast is a deep dive into the world of educational technology and its transformative impact on the student experience. Geek out each week with host Dustin Ramsdell. His conversations are a mix of engaging storytelling, expert analysis, and a genuine passion for all things higher ed and tech. Whether you're an educator or an administrator or just someone passionate about the intersection of technology and education, this podcast promises to deliver content that's both enlightening and entertaining. You can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or by searching The Higher Ed Geek wherever you get your podcasts.
I was to a point where I would talk to students and say, you know what, you're in college. Most people don't go into a career field with their degree anyway. Study something you enjoy and we'll figure out what you want to do with your life later. This study suggests that I cost a lot of people a lot of money, Timothy.
Welcome to the EduData Podcast, a podcast that serves as your weekly guide to the data driving higher education. We are your hosts. I'm Jamie Boggs.
And I'm Timothy Davis. Join us every Friday for weekly breakdowns of the most important data, trends, and topics in higher education.
The EduData Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at Enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below.
Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of the EduData Podcast. Jamie Boggs here with Timothy Davis. Timothy, how's life, man?
Hey, J-Bo. Doing pretty good. Can't complain. Perfect time of year, I think. This is like the early summer, late spring when it's cool in the morning, warm in the evening.
Yeah.
Pretty nice.
Yeah, everything's blooming, beautiful outside. We had some northern lights up here a few weeks ago.
Did you catch them?
People aren't here for the weather, but here you could see them with your phone. Not necessarily with your, like, you could see that it was bright with your duration. You had to use your phone, which I think Apple may have been involved somehow in the production of the northern lights, but we'll see about that. I don't know. No conspiracies here.
Solar flare.
It did.
Yeah, that was about the same as where it was for us. No naked eye observations, but certainly like a long exposure photo could pick it up, which pretty cool.
Yeah, you probably understand that more than I do because I was like, I don't get it. What we are here to talk about is the return on investment from higher education. A report just came out a couple weeks ago from the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity that really broke down. There's so much data in this thing, and you and I are going to look at it from a high level today, but basically it was a study about how much college increases your lifetime earnings minus the cost of college for 53,000 different degree and certificate programs. The findings were interesting, some surprising, and definitely I think this is applicable to a lot of people who work in higher ed, but also there's a deep dive in there in the methodology, which I think is what caught your eye the most.
Yeah, this is a really interesting study. It's one that tries to be really longitudinal, looking over the lifetime of a cohort and looking at sort of the return on investment and the expected earnings per degree over a longer time window than we typically consider. And the methodology gets into that a little bit. But yeah, I mean, overall, like, it's really comprehensive. It breaks down degree program by state. And this article provides like a table and a database that you can go in and sort of explore. So really interesting. And we've got some takeaways from that. But first, to talk a little bit more about the methodology, we'll have to link to two articles in our show notes here because the methodology is actually broken out into an entirely separate article, which I love. I think that's great to take such a long amount of time to explain the methodology and how you arrived at the conclusions. That provides us a lot of great visibility. So basically, This study is using publicly available data sets from the College Scorecard, which comes from the Department of Ed, the American Community Survey, the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, the National Survey of College Graduates, the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Survey, and the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System. So lots of different data sets that are looking at earnings at different points along a person's life. Of course, like we mentioned, the College Scorecard looks at a pretty short time window for ROI. And one of the things this study notes is that earnings tend to increase over a longer time window, right? When you're just out of college, your earnings are typically lower as you find your way into entry-level positions, right? It increases over time as you maybe work your way into more senior roles, etc. And so the challenge of this study was to combine that scorecard data as the primary data set with these other data sets to sort of augment and calculate ROI over a longer window. And so they provide a 10-year window for a cohort starting in 2016, I believe, and look at ROI. So really interesting. And they also provide kind of a metric breakdown. So I'm going to talk about those for a minute, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the joining of these data sets and sort of how that works. The first metric to break down is the realized earnings metric, which is the amount that a student who graduates with a particular post-secondary credential can expect to earn over the course of their life. Right, so that's the money you're going to make from the degree that you get. They also provide a counterfactual earning, which is kind of like an opportunity cost. So it's the money you could have made had you taken a different trajectory or not, and in this case, not pursued a degree. So that's the amount that the same student would have earned over the course of their life had they not pursued their credential. And this number includes the income that the student would have earned while they were in school.
Right. And what I love about this study is it includes demographics in that. It's not a flat rate of high school graduates earn this much and they just measure it against that. It includes information about the individual. So some individuals, even without a college degree, are going to earn more than others. And that's a part of the study. They don't just let that wash out, which I loved.
Exactly. But in that counterfactual calculation, they make an important sort of assumption. And when you join large data sets like this and you provide ROI estimates like this, you just have to make some assumptions to make the data work across all of those data sets. One of the assumptions is that college degree pursuers are not earning while they pursue their degree. And while certainly many may not choose to have a job while they pursue their degree, lots of students are using work study opportunities, etc., to just fund their lifestyle while they are also pursuing college. So it is, I would say, pretty common to have a job while you're working, while you're pursuing a degree. But this study assumes that you're not. So something to keep in mind there. And there are a lot of those kind of assumptions across the data sets that just have to be made. Not going to cover all of them, but they are explained pretty well in that methodology article, which again, we will link to. The other one is the cost of education. That's one of the other metrics that's provided in this study, and that's the amount that the student spends on tuition, required fees, and other education-related expenses such as books and equipment. It does not include living expenses such as rent and food, as students must spend money on these regardless of whether they attend college. And so there's kind of your counterbalance to that zero earnings assumption. There's also a zero living expense calculation in there too. So, if you're just earning to fund your lifestyle, to, rent an apartment with your friends, or, go to Lollapalooza, whatever.
Of course.
That's part of the assumption there, is that we're not calculating those lifestyle expenses as the cost of education, because you'd be doing those anyway. Great. Then we have the completion rate, and that is the chance that the student will finish their degree program and therefore realize the earnings benefits of the credential.
There's also the element that they call out with the time to degree. So, for example, if you took most of the data is based on 4 years for a degree. If you take 5 years, obviously that takes a year away from earning potential and adds tuition costs. So it's a pretty big swing there for that 1 year. So, but they do acknowledge that in this study. So they're taking into account your cousin, that went to college for 7 years to get a 2-year degree. That person is accounted for in this study.
Absolutely. And so, with those metrics, then we arrive at ROI, which is the equivalent of realized earnings minus the sum of counterfactual earnings, so minus the opportunity cost earnings. So basically controlling for what you would have made anyway.
Right.
So minus the counterfactual earnings and the cost of college. So take the cost plus what you would have earned anyway, presumably, and then subtract that from what you will earn, and that's how they arrive at ROI. And they also factor in, of course, that completion rate. So that's this study's definition of ROI. And again, just important to keep these in mind as we peruse these data sets and as we peruse these articles. Of course, these articles have been sort of presented to us for public consumption, but it's important to take a look under the hood at the methodology just so that we understand what's going on and how these estimates are realized.
Absolutely. I think this calculation for ROI is as good as any. You're never going to get to a perfect spot because there are always going to be things that come up that you can't account for every edge case. So I like this definition for ROI and the way they're calculating it. I do have to go back to my previous life as an advisor on a college campus. By the end of my tenure, and I did that for like 15 years, I was to a point where I would talk to students and say, you know what, you're in college. Most people don't go into a career field with their degree anyway. Study something you enjoy and we'll figure out what you want to do with your life later. This study suggests that I cost a lot of people a lot of money, Timothy, that I told them to major in something they liked and they went on to potentially earn less than they could have. Now, that's in jest, but it is something to consider when you dig into these things. For example, I'm going to call out some of the surprises to me, I guess. First, some non-surprises: computer science, nursing, engineering, high earners, high ROI. I think that's
STEM.
Pretty expected.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. Most of STEM. However, biology is a very low ROI, which I did not expect. So there's in psychology as well. However, those are taken into account of people that only received a bachelor's in those fields. So if you go on to get a doctorate or a master's degree, then that certainly changes. But a biology degree by itself has a very low ROI compared to other sciences especially.
Hey, it's Mallory. Exciting news! I'm hosting the Engage Summit in Raleigh on June 25th and 26th, and I'd love to meet you there. Together, we'll dive into the mind of the modern student, what fires them up, how they interact, and what they expect in today's digital age, and how tools like AI help put them in the driver's seat of their education. We have some terrific speakers, including our closing keynote, New York Times best-selling author Jeff Selingo. Sessions will dig into practical ideas and innovative strategies to get your team more student-centered and ready to adopt AI. And many of your favorite Enrollify hosts are presenting too, like Jamie Hunt, Jenny Lee Fowler, and Brian Gross. Use the discount code Enrollify50 for an extra $50 off your registration. Learn more and register at engage.element451.com. We can't wait to see you there.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, I think that makes sense from the way that you might take a biology degree. There's a lot of different directions you could go with that degree. So, I don't know. Is that kind of what you were gonna say?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things you could do, but I think the world of science with biology and I mean, there are a ton of careers, and that's one thing we don't think of is all the different careers you can do with these degrees. Like, you automatically pigeonhole of somebody majored in psychology, they're going to be a counselor. No, they could do 100 different careers that their degree applies to. So I think that's something that needs to be taken into account. Then the other low ROI fields, education, English, and then you actually start getting into the negatives when you get into the fine arts like studio art, music, and drama. And I know that's kind of a stereotype for those groups, but this study kind of proves it out that if you get a degree in those, you are limiting your earning potential. And based on this study, not only are you not reaching your potential, but you're losing money based on how much you paid for the degree.
Right. And that's, I agree. I think that's kind of a trope in the industry now, is that if you study humanities, if you study art, if you study anything that's not like a high value career path, that you're quote unquote wasting your money. There's a lot to be said about that, and maybe we'll circle back to the liberal arts and to the humanities and talk about measures of success. I think that's also relevant to this discussion when we're talking about higher education. But yeah, when you look at just the raw money inputs and outputs, we do arrive at a negative ROI calculation for those degree paths.
Yeah, I went to a liberal arts school, and absolutely there was there was such an emphasis on the humanities there, and I do have a mathematics degree from there, but a lot of people did go that direction, and this study addresses that. This does not account what your degree led to your social standing, your lifestyle, what you appreciate, those different measures of success like you just mentioned. This is dollars and cents. So if you major in English and you study literature from all over the world and you're really fulfilled, then it may not matter how much money you lost, right? It doesn't account for that. So I want to address that. And the study itself does so as well. So I appreciated that from it. The last thing I want to call out, I know we've been talking for a while, is really the variation from different credentials. So it breaks down the percentage of programs that have a positive ROI for undergraduate certificates, associates, bachelor's, master's, and then doctoral and professional degrees. And that was the one that jumped out to me the most, because some things were fairly surprising. You look at an undergraduate certificate, and based on the way this breaks out, it's almost as likely to have a return on investment than a bachelor's degree is. Undergraduate certificate, 72% of those have a positive ROI, 77% of bachelor's degrees. So nearly 25% of bachelor's degrees do account for that negative ROI.
Yeah, but the other one that I think we could mention when we're looking at a breakdown between positive and negative ROIs, and one that'll be, I think, really relevant to an audience of admissions and marketing professionals, is the graduate degree percentages.
Yep.
The graduate degree percentages, looking at the distribution of ROI, positive and negative, only 57% of master's degrees calculated here had a positive ROI, while 43% had a negative. That's nearly half that are having a negative, and we kind of see that report in the midst of graduate education marketing and enrollment strategy really ramping up, as a lot of people look to those degree paths and look to those degree offerings to sort of supplement their enrollment.
Yeah, I think, and this is just my perception, so anecdotally, for my parents, graduating from high school, you had to do that if you want to make a living. For my generation, you had to go to college, you had to get a bachelor's. I feel like I realize there's also a push into the trades now, which I can appreciate, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but now a master's degree is almost the new bachelor's degree. If you don't have a master's degree in certain fields, they won't even look at you, no matter how talented you are, the experience you have. And to see that the likelihood of a payoff is just over half, I don't know. It's not a good situation we're putting people in to say you have to have this, but it's going to cost you.
Right. Well, I appreciate that you bring up the generational sort of aspect to this. And, I think, if you're listening to the Enrollify network, you're going to hear plenty of people that are going to jump to the defense of the humanities and the liberal arts and to the sort of culture and the lifeblood of higher education as an institution, as a whole. And I think the contribution that we can make to that here, as you're talking about generations, when we look at these measures of ROI, kind of two talking points tend to emerge. One is like a buyer beware. Really pay attention, consumer, as you go out there and you get your degree, because you could be just burning money. The other one kind of puts all the fault on higher education. Higher education needs to be responsible for not offering these quote unquote junk humanities programs that are just losing all this money and the federal government is subsidizing them. I see that argument. I recognize that argument. I think that that's certainly a valid argument and one that we need to be discussing, but it doesn't exist in a vacuum, and I think we make a misstep when we place the blame solely on higher education in that context, right? Because the economic conditions that existed when higher education really kind of hit its stride in the 50s, 60s, 70s, in the sort of post-war era, in the Cold War era, saw a very different economic environment than the one that we exist in now. Right.
Yeah, and thanks for not assuming I was alive during that era. I appreciate that. It's very thankful.
Right. I definitely was not doing that.
Yes. The economic environment is very different, and I don't know. I think we kind of talked about it earlier. If you're looking for blame, which is probably not going to solve our problem, it's just something that people like to do. You're looking at the workforce. Why are we requiring you to have this master's degree to do this job? Why are we requiring a doctorate to do this? So I think that could increase the likelihood of return on investment for several of these less than master's degree credentials, but also maybe it's going to limit the number of people that get master's degrees because they don't need them, and thus the ROI on master's degrees is going to go up. So I think the workforce could, and again, it's so many different fields and that kind of thing that you're not going to universally solve it, but that's certainly a portion of the accountability as well.
Sure. And I mean, I wanted to thank you for mentioning the labor market. I mean, that certainly has changed over these last decades. You know, we've seen not so much labor law, but certainly like labor practice, right? We've not seen as much organizing amongst labor that has been able to negotiate salaries. Of course, we're seeing a little bit more of that come up in like manufacturing, especially in like the auto sector, but that has not been as prominent as it was in that decade. And then we also just had a different sort of corporate environment, right? We've seen a lot of consolidation over the last 20, 30 years. We've, of course, seen a lot of manufacturing move overseas, right? So a lot of those macroeconomic forces have also shaped the labor market. We can't just ignore those and say, like, higher education is solely at fault. Again, not to romanticize that era and not to absolve higher education of any fault that it has, but it's a larger context. It's a larger system at play here. And simply saying that higher education is wasting money on humanities is not the answer.
Correct. And just as we wrap up, a couple takeaways here. For the marketing piece, this is broken down by those programs that do see the biggest to smallest ROI. I think you could use those if you're recruiting to programs that are positive. Emphasize it. Use it as much as you can. Have people, have Scrooge McDuck swimming in some money if you're trying to get people to come to your engineering program, right? But if you are recruiting for those humanities programs, you need to know what you're up against. You need to highlight what your program's about and just realize that perception's out there and find ways to highlight and emphasize the things you are learning and the careers you can have and the success and how that's measured within that field, I think needs to be a part of the conversation, because you need to be prepared to, you don't have to go out and be defensive, but you have to be prepared to, you have to understand that that's out there.
Absolutely. Well, I think that there's a lot more that could be said there, and some of that is a little bit out of our wheelhouse, certainly as just data professionals, but important context to be aware of. So a lot more conversation to be had. Thank you guys for joining us today. For Jamie Boggs, I'm Timothy Davis. Have a great rest of your week or your weekend.
The EduData Podcast is part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month. We've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional.
Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Jamie Hunt, Artis Cadu, Dustin Ramsdale, Jeremy Tiers, and so many of your other favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.